Good afternoon, everyone. I'd invite everyone to take a chair, please, and so we can start our program. Thank you all for coming. I'm Nina Shea, and I direct the Center for Religious Freedom here at the Hudson Institute. And on behalf of Hudson Center and on behalf of the Working Group on Christians and Religious Pluralism, which is housed at the center, and also on behalf of our co-sponsor today, the Religious Freedom Institute, I welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming. We're here to observe the solemn commemoration of religious genocide in Nineveh, Iraq, 4 years ago. It was today that exactly today, 4 years ago, that ISIS attacked the Yezidi population in Nineveh. It was to eventually take over 6,000 women and children into slavery, killing maybe up to 10,000 men. Mass graves are still being uncovered. Forcible conversion was also quite common. 3 days later, ISIS, the ultra-brutal terrorist group, went on to attack the largest Christian town, Karakosh, in Nineveh, and continued its siege of Sinjar Mountain. It was on August 7th that President Obama initiated airstrikes to defend the minorities. The Christians, of course, had been attacked earlier when ISIS entered Mosul in June and July, and all the minorities would continue to be brutalized through August until the area was firmly under the control of ISIS's caliphate by the end of the summer. The caliphate was announced from Nineveh. There has been a mass exodus. These communities are diminished. The genocide continues to this day. About 90% of the Christian communities are gone. Nadia Murad told me last week that 100,000, tens of thousands of Yezidis, not even sure, have also left. It was then that Washington, those of us in Washington who were following these horrifying events, started campaigning, building a coalition to campaign for the official designation of genocide. Congress legislated that the Secretary of State make an official determination by a certain deadline in 2016 whether or not there was genocide. And the Secretary of State did so on March 17th, 2016. It was repeated again under the Trump administration in 2017 by the Secretary of State. So this was an official designation. And I've heard people say, well, there was no official designation. There was. It was done at the behest of Congress. It was done at a press conference called for that purpose in the State Department twice. Congress each passed resolutions that declared this a genocide as well. And we have Drew Bowling from Congressman Fortenberry's office who led this fight in the House to get this designated. Genocide, of course, is the gravest of all human rights abuses. And this is only the second time that the United States has declared a genocide while it was going on. The last one was in Darfur. It is the only genocide that the United States recognizes at this time that is occurring in real time. So we will be talking about these issues and about the fact that the genocide in many ways is continuing in Nineveh. And ISIS caliphate no longer exists. It has been defeated, yet ISIS is still around in the area. And we just got word this week that 36 Druze women and children were taken into sexual slavery by ISIS in Syria. Aid and reconstruction are what is occupying us now, and for those of us who work on this issue, and we'll be talking about this today. To start, it is my pleasure to introduce Ambassador Farid Yassin, who is from Iraq, represents Iraq in Washington, D.C. He also started his life, his career as a human rights researcher and activist. He was a physicist, and he is now here in Washington. I'm very pleased to welcome you back to Hudson Institute, Ambassador.
Thank you all. Speaking at such occasions is a dubious honor because there's so much pain attached to it. I'm going to focus on the Yezidis, but please bear in mind that ISIS has targeted everybody else. And I'm going to start with an incident that happened in 2009, in November 2009. Eric Schmidt, head of Google, came to Baghdad, and he met with my boss at the time, Foreign Minister Hoshar Zebari. And in the discussion, he asked us, what was the most difficult moment you lived through as Iraqis? And there, the interesting thing is that we gave different answers. Some said it was the events of the Anfal, where more than 100,000 people disappeared, associated with the gassing of thousands of people in villages. Others said it's the quelling of the uprising after the 1991 Gulf War, where tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of Iraqis disappeared in mass graves. The point I want to make is that Saddam's darkest legacy, if you will, is that he gave us a choice of what was the worst thing he left us with. But if somebody had asked this question to any Iraqi in September of 2014, the answer would have been, what happened to the Yezidis? Nothing is worse. Nothing. We got 200,000 displaced. We've got almost 10,000 casualties, disappeared, killed. We've got thousands of women taken hostage, made sexual slaves in the 21st century. My God, this is beyond unacceptable. And as an Iraqi, it's beyond unacceptable to me because we're the country that invented the code of law, that invented civilization, that invented writing. It hurts. It really does. But the targeting of the Yezidis did not begin with what happened in 2014. Recall that in 2007, two Yezidi villages were targeted in an integrated attack of the hallmarks of al-Qaeda in Iraq that led to the killing of about 500 people and the wounding of about 1,500. In proportion to Iraq, these numbers are even greater than what you suffered through on September the 11th. And what makes it really painful is that these targets were poor rural populations, just, living their lives. And the fate of the Yezidis is special to me because of all the Iraqi communities, they're perhaps those that are most attached to their ancestral land, to Mount Sinjar. And one piece of news that I read that really affected me, that I think gives tribute to the United States, is that for the first time in history, Yezidis settling outside of their ancestral homes consecrated land to bury their dead in. Before that, they always used to seek to fly back to be buried on Mount Sinjar. Maybe this is a mark of globalization. But please measure the depth of this action. So what's my job as an Iraqi ambassador here? Well, I tell my compatriots that I know what's happened. I've spent part of my life, as was mentioned earlier, documenting disappearances. It sometimes was a lonesome work, and I can assure you that there were times where I thought I might need some psychiatric help. But I'm very cognizant of the circumstances that people in exile have gone through. I myself was an exiled Iraqi. And what I tell them is, make your lives, but don't forget your home country. It's your home country. And we stand ready at the embassy to help, to assist, to try to foster exchanges, support with all the communities that are Iraqi, and God knows there are many, and some of them are older than civilization itself. I thought in this, talking about these sad things, that it might be useful to mention a few names that are examples that shed light on darkness. The first name I'll mention is Vivian Dakhil, whose heart-rending cry at the Iraqi parliament in August of 2014 made us wake up and realize it needed to be something that needed to be done. She was on board a Iraqi Air Force helicopter on the 12th of August 2000, and yes, I think it was 12th of August 2014. Which was laden with refugees from Sinjar, piloted by an Iraqi Major General, Majid al-Saadi. She wrote very movingly of her experience there. The helicopter crashed. The only victim was this pilot, who had told her before getting on the plane that what he was doing there was the most important thing he had done in his entire life, in a career of 35 years at the Iraqi Air Force. He was not a junior officer, Major General in charge of training of the Iraqi Air Force, left his mission, went to Sinjar to help, and died in so doing. And I think there is a statue honoring him in a park in Kurdistan. I mention Fian. I'll mention Alyssa Rubin, a friend of mine who wrote movingly about what happened that day. She's the New York Times correspondent, Pulitzer Prize winner. And I urge you to read her article. It's dated the 16th of August 2014, where she relates this entire incident. I'll mention Masoud Barzani, who shortly after the first wave, after the Peshmerga and the Iraqi forces, different Iraqi forces, stopped the attack of ISIS, he came to Paris. I was the ambassador there. And I asked him, what's the most difficult thing you're facing right now? And he paused, and he said, preventing young Yezidis from seeking revenge. This is very consequential. It's not a casual remark, because Masoud Barzani has suffered deeply. More than 8,000 of his kinsmen and kinswomen disappeared. And I'll mention Charles Keating IV. He's the first American to have died fighting ISIS. Actually, he went beyond the mandate of his mission and gave his life in this honorable cause. And I will mention, though not by name, the thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of Iraqi soldiers, volunteers, who gave their lives. Most of them, they actually came from all parts of Iraq, whether Kurdistan, Peshmerga, whether the regular army or the counterterrorism service, or the volunteers of the popular mobilizations. But most of the victims actually came from the south and gave their lives to defeat ISIS militarily. Now, ISIS is defeated militarily, but it still is a threat. It is dangerous. They're in Iraq and elsewhere. The example that you mentioned is very telling. But there is, what this shows is that there is a mobilization of Iraqi society to go beyond this. The country that has defeated ISIS is not the same country that it was in 2014. Our armed forces of 2018 are not the same as they were in 2014. This mobilization nationwide was echoed by the international community, and we're grateful for that. First of all, the establishment of the coalition headed by the United States, without which we would not have been able to defeat ISIS. But then early on, international efforts to try to heal, to bring repair to the country. I'll mention President Hollande, who immediately held a conference in Paris in support of Iraqi minorities on the 15th of September 2014. I'll mention Secretary Kerry, who immediately held a special session of the Security Council, where I think he quoted almost verbatim from Alyssa Rubin's articles. There is now global mobilization. There are now even Security Council resolutions that give us a plan of action of what to do. But what do we do now? I mean, we can talk about the past as much as we want, but what do we do now? Well, there's much to do in two directions, if I may. One is to repair, and one is to prevent. Okay. Repairing means making things right. And to me, making things right will be achieved once people who have left their ancestral homes will feel comfortable enough to settle back there. And this requires a lot of support. It requires a lot of effort. It requires proper policing, local policing, support of the government, support of the international community, and trust building between all Iraq's communities and with the international community. I have to tell you that there was a time where we were resentful because the international community waited a bit before coming to our support. And, you know, the months of June, July, and August of 2014 were extremely difficult. Nonetheless, much is being done. I mean, just a few days ago, there was a major ministerial conference on religious freedom held in this country, organized by Secretary Pompeo, and we're grateful for his effort. And in fact, the documents that emanated from that conference, the Potomac Plan of Action, and Vice President Pence's keynote speech contain elements that can be real key factors in developing a plan of action to address this issue. I mean, ISIS is not only targeted on our region. They're global. Just yesterday, the day before that, they blew up a mosque in Afghanistan. You know, 25 victims. And then we have to prevent. We have to prevent by getting to know each other better, by holding conferences such as this one, and I'm grateful for this. Hopefully in Iraq as well. One of the things that I begrudge my culture is I learned about the Yezidis reading a book in English. That needs to be addressed. We have an effort to do in Iraq. There's an effort to be done in ensuring that there is accountability. There is an effort to be done in terms of maintaining memory. And we would like to do this, but we don't have the means to. I remember in 2003 when the first mass graves were discovered in the south of Iraq. I wrote an op-ed in which I asked for the help of the international community to provide us with the tools to preserve forensic evidence so that people at least can find the remains of their loved ones and achieve some sense of closure. Well, we need this all the more, and we needed it not only for the people in the south, but also for all the victims in Iraq, from Fao all the way to Dahok, and then particularly for the Yezidis. And in this, I think we need the help and support of the United States. And I don't think that the United States will be reluctant to give us that help. And so I look forward to a fruitful and promising cooperation. And I would like to close by mentioning the role that institutions like the Hudson Institute or other think tanks in Washington can do to bring people together to discuss this issue. I'm here. Iraqi colleagues are here. There are people from various institutions that can help us achieve this commendable goal. So in closing, I really want to thank you for having invited me to come and speak here. I hope I haven't been too long, but this is a topic that bears talking about and not being forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I want to thank the ambassador for his poignant words and for standing in solidarity today as one with the persecuted minorities of Iraq. Now I'd like to introduce the Honorable Bayan Sami Abdul Rahman, who is the representative in the United States in Washington of the KRG. And she has been, in addition to a diplomat in her life, she spent 17 years as a journalist, for which she won awards. Her father was a leader for freedom in Kurdistan in Iraq during the Saddam Hussein period, and was he and her brother were both killed in a dual suicide bombing attack in 2004. So please join me in welcoming Bayan to the podium. Thank you very much. I also want to say that the representative has put out this wonderful booklet called Echoes of Genocide that encompasses a number of genocides of both of the Kurds, the Yezidis, and the Christians, and there are copies in the hallway right outside the room for everyone. Thank you. Yeah, cool, thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Nina, and Ambassador Yassin, honored speakers, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. I'd like to thank the Hudson Institute for hosting this event and the Religious Freedom Institute. It's important, as His Excellency the Ambassador said, that we commemorate and honor the victims of genocide. Genocide has been the fate of many groups in Kurdistan and Iraq. It's important that we recognize what happened to them, to the Yezidis, the Christians, the Shabaks, the Kakis, the Kurds, the Arabs, the Barzanis, the Failis, the people of Halabja, the people of Kirkuk, and those killed in the Anfal campaign. And there are many others who suffered through terrorism, oppression, and violence. The challenge for us is to keep the memory of these horrific tragedies alive, to preserve the dignity of those we have lost, and at the same time to move forward without allowing hatred and division to grow. We must never forget the crimes that ISIS committed 4 years ago when it rampaged across Iraq, and then on August 3rd, it targeted Shingal or Sinjar and other places across Nineveh. We must do all we can to help the survivors to restore their homes and livelihoods, to seek justice for the victims of ISIS's crimes. When this terrorist organization struck in the summer of 2014, it hurt all components of our society. No single community in Iraq was left unscathed. However, it is the minorities who bore the brunt. Thousands were killed. Thousands were forced, hundreds of thousands were forced to abandon their homes, their livelihoods, their dreams, their hopes, while others, especially Yazidi women and girls, became the victims of systematic rape and enslavement. The Kurdistan Regional Government welcomes the United States call for countries that believe in religious freedom to establish August 3rd as a day to recognize and remember the survivors of religious persecution. We welcome this recognition of what happened on August 3rd. This call was made last week, as His Excellency mentioned, at the first ministerial conference to advance religious freedom hosted by the State Department. The KRG has observed the August 3rd anniversary and will continue to do so, and we will continue to support everyone's right to practice their faith. We also commend the commitment of President Trump's administration to promote and defend religious freedom as a human right around the world. The KRG values the United States' financial assistance to restore the Nineveh Plain, and we fully support the US commitment to promote stability and security in Iraq through religious freedom. But looking at ourselves, it's long overdue for us in Iraq and our international allies to find a way to put an end to the repeated cycles of violence in our country. Ensuring stability, security, economic opportunity across Iraq is the only way to enable every citizen, including those from minorities, to live a reasonable life. Without these ingredients, reconciliation and trust cannot be achieved. The steps that need to be taken are many. I made a list and I read out the list at a similar event last year. Sadly, I need to repeat many of those items on the list because little has changed. We need security, stability, and reconstruction. We need the liberated areas to be decontaminated of mines, IEDs, and for the militias to be removed so that communities can return home. Economic opportunities and development. We welcome the pledges of $30 billion of investment in Iraq that were made at the Kuwait conference earlier this year. But when will those pledges be implemented? The people of Nineveh, the people of Iraq, cannot wait forever. Without housing and job opportunities, the displaced cannot return home, and those once thriving towns and villages in Nineveh, Kirkuk, in Sinjar, will remain rubble. Legislation to bring about equal citizenship. We need changes in national laws that currently do not treat women and religious and ethnic minorities as equal citizens. The Constitution of Iraq does recognize us all as equal citizens. The laws do not. That needs to change. Local autonomy. Many of the communities in Sinjar, Nineveh, and other areas have called for their towns and villages and cities to be protected and to be administered by their own communities. The KRG has and continues to support this, but we don't see support elsewhere. Build an Iraqi army. Iraq needs to build an army that truly reflects the makeup of the country and not just one ethnic or religious component. Professionalize, train, and equip the Peshmerga. The KRG needs to implement a unification and professionalization of our armed forces. The Ministry of Peshmerga has already embarked on this reform program with the technical assistance of the United States, Germany, and Britain. Education is an area in critical need of change. Our children, whatever their ethnic and religious background, need to be educated about religious freedom, human rights, and respect for the other. Sadly, across the Middle East, this is rarely the case. Justice and accountability. The KRG welcomes UN Security Council Resolution 2379 to establish an independent investigative team to support domestic efforts to hold ISIS accountable. The KRG is fully committed to assist and support this team, but the team and the various UN departments must ensure they include the KRG in the discussions and the process of gathering evidence and drafting laws. We have established an evidence-gathering center. Many of the survivors are in Kurdistan, and many of the perpetrators are in our custody. It is essential that the UN does not exclude the KRG from this process. The KRG has taken several steps to raise international awareness about the genocide and to support survivors and alleviate their suffering. But there is still a great deal more that we should do. The KRG was the first government to recognize ISIS's crimes as genocide. We established a high committee to gain recognition internationally for this. The KRG has encouraged the UN and ICC to investigate ISIS and to create an international or a hybrid court to put them on trial, in addition to local courts. As of July 2018, the KRG Prime Minister's Office and Kurdistan Security Services have helped 3,350 Yezidis escape ISIS. Regrettably, with great sorrow, 3,102 remain in captivity. We have protected IDPs and refugees from Syria, totaling 1.8 million at their peak. We have provided resources to the Christian churches, Yezidi organizations, and other communities who fled ISIS. Our Peshmerga have made great sacrifices. Over 1,700 have been killed and almost 11,000 have been injured. My message to all ethnic and religious components in Iraqi Kurdistan, my message to our Yezidi and Christian friends here, my message to all of us is to stay in our homeland, stay in your homeland. We can, together with the help of our international partners, do our best to build a prosperous future for all. We see strength in our diversity. We in the Kurdistan region do not claim perfection, but on the whole, we have a culture of peaceful, harmonious coexistence. But we must nurture and protect this. Kurdistan region is one of the last safe havens in the Middle East. It deserves to be supported so that we can better support, protect, and cherish all the diverse communities of our society and across Iraq. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable. Thank you for your thoughtful, inspirational words. It is now my pleasure to introduce my co-sponsor, Kent Hill, Dr. Kent Hill, from the Executive Director of the Religious Freedom Institute here in Washington. And Kent has a long career in aid in various positions. But Kent, I think I know you dating from the Cold War days when you were Executive Director, President of IRD, Institute on Religion and Democracy. Yeah, so welcome.
Thank you.
Good to have you.
Look, I'll be very brief. The Religious Freedom Institute's very honored to co-host this event. And I do want to thank you, Nina, not just for co-hosting this, but we have been in the trenches together for a few decades on matters related to human rights. And I also want to thank my colleague, Jeremy Barker at the Religious Freedom Institute for helping put together a lot of the details for this. And I want to thank all of you for making time in your schedules to come. You know, the barbaric intolerance which lies behind the crime of genocide is a mystery of evil that we're all here in some form or another to deal with today. And I would be remiss if I did not note that the Islamist extremism that ISIS represented was hostile to most Muslims as well, hostile to Shia, hostile to al-Sunni, who would not bow to their wishes. And so this Islamist extremism is a profound threat, not just to non-Muslims, but to Muslims as well. But we're here today to talk about the Christians and the Yezidis. And I won't repeat things that have been said here earlier about what has happened since the summer of 2014, except to note one thing. I want to note that of those 6,000 or 7,000 women, Yezidi women who disappeared or were taken and became sex slaves in 2014 and beyond, over 3,000 of them, we still don't know where they are. They're still unaccounted for. There is much here that needs to be done that we need to think about. I also want to say that I think you may know that tonight at the White House at 7:30, there will be a vigil for the Yezidis, and some of you may want to be there for that. Outside here, outside in the foyer, you'll find some paintings that you might also find interesting. They're painted by Yezidi young people, 13, 14 years old. There's one of a butterfly, which is painted by a young man, both of whose parents, both parents were killed in the attacks on Sinjar. It's very moving to see this attempt to find hope amidst the despair of what's happened. But I want to conclude with this point. This is not just about protecting minorities in Iraq or any place else in the world. This is about protecting pluralism. And the ambassador, as I told him before he started today, I have heard him say on other occasions that there is no Iraq without its minorities. What does he mean? He means by that unless a culture and a country is pluralistic, it will never be safe for its own citizens or the citizens of its neighbors. There is empirical evidence that when minorities are safe in a country, it is a more peaceful society. It is one that flourishes. It is one that every other indicator of human flourishing will go up. We are about not just commemorating what has gone wrong. We are here to think about how to protect those who are still in harm's way, but also to help them be restored. And I must confess, as a former member of the USAID and other U.S. governments who've worked on international development, we haven't been very speedy. And our slowness have made it impossible for the IDPs to go back to areas that have now been taken over. But it's never too late to do better. And I think we're trying to do better. But we have to be very vigilant about helping in the restoration of the victims of genocide. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you for all your work to bring this program together today. I appreciate it. It's very, very important that we not forget. Now it's time for our panel. So we're going to be switching out a little bit. The podium is going to go away. But can I ask the panelists to please come to the front? Thank you. It doesn't matter. Okay. Welcome. Thanks. Oh, it's going already. Okay, great.
Okay. Right in the middle.
I'm going to call on you first. So we're going to begin our discussion today about the genocide then and what is happening now and what we all can do about it or are doing about it. Our speakers today include Pari Ibrahim from the Executive Director of the Free Yezidi Foundation. I'm going to just give a very brief title because we need to get to our discussion and there's so many of us and I'm thrilled about that if we went into the long bios, there wouldn't be any time. It would cut into our time. Sherry Graham Talabani, who is the president of the Seed Foundation, is on my right. Louis Mikhail is the senior Iraq advisor for Iraq Haven Project, second on the end. Douglas Paget, who is senior advisor, Office of International Religious Freedom of the State Department. And Ashur Eskria, the president of the Assyrian Aid Society on the far end, who has joined us all the way from Dohuk. So welcome all of you. I want to start, Pari, with you to ask you to describe the events, just a brief description of the events 4 years ago and what happened to your community.
Thank you. I think everyone can understand that today is a very difficult day for us. And even some Yezidis were contacting me constantly and by mail and by phone to say that I should not come to this event anymore because they are done with constantly talking and talking and talking about the genocide, but not much is being done for my people. It is for the Free Yazidi Foundation and just for Yazidis in general. It is very difficult to deal with governments that do not empower our people. On August 3rd in 2014, my people were attacked and no one knew even who Yezidis were. So we needed a genocide to make people aware of our existence in Iraq, in Kurdistan. That is really, when you think about it and just be silent for a minute, to think about that a genocide is needed to make people aware of our existence. We do not get fair treatment even after the genocide. 4 years have passed. Our women and girls are still in captivity. It is true that ISIS is gone, but my people cannot go back to Sinjar because borders are closed, shut down before them. They cannot bury their loved ones. Mass graves are still there, not uncovered. IEDs are still in Sinjar. Small steps are being taken by organizations, but really not much is being done for my people. Our people do not even have a political voice. If we have one voice in Iraq, does not mean that we really have a political representation of Yezidis. We are a little bit over 1 million Yezidis around the world. Now over 400,000 Yezidis are displaced. We have no voice. And I don't care who stands anywhere and says that Yezidis do have a voice. It is not true. It cost us, as voices of Yezidis, a lot of effort to make one point clear. Because believe me, we are the last item on the agenda, if we are even on the agenda. I stand here today as a Yezidi, not even as the Free Yazidi Foundation, no, as a Yezidi, because my people suffer. After 4 years, they still suffer. Why is no one talking about the more than 3,000 women and girls in captivity? If any one of you was missing a little girl, Amber Alert would go off on everyone's phone. I even received one this morning. Why is no one caring about my family? Till today, I have lost 17 girls in my family. No one is talking about it. Do I still have to sit here and talk about the Yezidi genocide? What more do you want to know? The 21 members of my family are dead in mass graves, and no one is looking where they are. No one is identifying them after 4 years, because probably people do not care about the Yezidis. I'm grateful for events that are taking place to raise more awareness about our people. But believe me when I say that not much is being done for my people. Things that need to be changed. No, I want to say one thing. Today is 3 August. Today is about the Yazidi people. I'm emotional and I am angry. Today is 3 August. It should be about Yazidis. The Yazidi genocide. That should be remembered today. Any other day, if you want me to talk about the Christians, the Kakais, the Mendes, any minority that suffers in Iraq, you can call me and I will say everything. But today I will talk about my people and their suffering, because nothing's being done.
Well, I thank you for your courage to come forward and talk and join us today. Words are inadequate to express how sorry we are for your personal losses and for the losses of the communities there. Ashur, could you tell us about what happened to your community on August 7th and in the before and after as well, representing the Christian community?
As you know, Syrian, Yazidis, they been targeted to genocide many times last 100 years. In 1933, more than 6,000 people been killed until this moment, and this was again in August 7 and during August. And ISIS, when they enter Nineveh Plain after they attacking Yezidis people in Sinjar, they choose the date that Syrian been targeted in 1933. Unfortunately, Iraqi's government or KRG, until this moment, they didn't recognize what happened as genocide, and nothing was helpful for people who be saved from 1933. Until this moment, most of their lands are taken. So if we mention now the current situation in Nineveh Plain, still people didn't return back to all the region, even after liberation. It's the same situation as she mentioned about Yezidis. We have only in Nineveh Plain in Baghdad, Karakosh, about 55% people return back, which is their population was 60,000 in 2014. Now there's about 30,000 that return back because the local forces there is from the society, from the community, but other places like Tel Keif, but 9% of people who return back is close to zero. In Mosul, which were housed for 60,000 Christian in 2003. Now there's a few families, less than 50 families that return back. In Tel Luskov and other places, there's still tension, and the roads is closed again from Al-Qosh to Tel Keif, and the current situation is totally bad. And it's important to give hope to people to return back, to build the trust, to reunite Nineveh Plain, to give authority to local forces from the region to protect the region, bring out all the militias, even Peshmerga, and to neutralize the region from the tension from both sides.
We're going to get into the recommendations and what to do now. Louis, could you describe what happened to the Christians? Because that story is really not well known. I mean, there hasn't been the last girl book written, which was Nadia Murad's excellent and brave account of what happened to her as a Yezidi. But we don't have that equivalent for the Christians. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, first just allow me to thank the Hudson Institute and Religious Freedom Institute and the Ambassador of Iraq and Bayan for the great remarks they made, and also the panels. I also agree completely with our sister, Yezidi sister, that this is something you need to be speaking about. I want to say is that the picture behind the title itself can say what is the condition of the Christians, Yezidis, and other minorities itself. What happened, I think most of the stories has been told by the international, by a lot of activists, NGOs, families. A lot of you went there, they heard the story, what happened just there. The life was taken from the people, Nina, because of they didn't agree of what ISIS believed. There was a lack of protection, and from entire Iraqi ISF. Also, I'm not saying that there was a Peshmerga protecting. Also, Peshmerga, they had some problems down there at the beginning when the ISIS came. But until this moment, we keep talking about genocide, how people are frustrated from 1.5 million, 200,000 left, 1 point something Christians, Yezidis, and now their numbers dropped. You have people living in Turkey, in Amman, in Beirut. Those people, they have no future. They fled to the exile for seeking shelter, protection, but nothing is really there for them. And some of them, they try to come back, but they don't have even the price of the ticket to come back, because they've been in the camps, in the places that nobody is supporting them. So it's very, here, we keep talking about genocide. I'm grateful to the Congress passing the resolution, to the Obama administration saying, okay, it's genocide, and the continuation of President Trump's administration to recognize as genocide. Okay, it's genocide. We understand that. It's good.
Did you hear about the cases of the crucifixions?
Yeah,
I heard a shocking report of a crucifixion in the church in Teleskov.
Yeah, that's true. There was a couple of cases of crucifixion and also...
Or beheading.
Beheading, yeah. That was true. There was some cases. But, genocide is not only occurred by attacking people, only by continuing the implementation of ISIS ideology on the ground. For example, I spoke with Ambassador Yassin a few days ago. I said, Ambassador, there's stories, those stories need to be told, and people, they need to hear it. Family in Mosul, for example, when the Baghdadi declared that the Christians and non-Muslims, that they should leave Mosul, and in 48 hours, otherwise there will be crucifixion, there will be jizya pay if they want to stay, or they have to convert to Islam. So few families stayed because they didn't have a mean to leave Mosul, and neighbors coming to them, knocking the door and saying, hey neighbor, do you hear Baghdadi said 48 hours, if you don't flee now, I have a right to kill you and seize your house. So those stories are true. Mm-hmm. Those are true stories.
There was a debate in Washington that the Christians really weren't victims of genocide because ISIS offered them a tax option. Yeah, and okay. I personally looked into that and researched it and talked to the priests that had dealings with ISIS and found that, in fact, there wasn't an option
You're
there.
Right.
And that when Christians tried to pay a tax, they were refused. And that it was a sham, it was a propaganda stunt to make them appear more caliph-like. That there was no protection, either physical for them personally, financially for them personally, or protecting their ability to worship. Their churches were all destroyed. So
I just want to be quickly about the jizya. That's true. They're like when the State Department was making the case that this should be like, oh, the Christians can stay, they can pay jizya. Look, there was a families in Erbil. Nobody was able to reach them, and they because nobody heard about them. They stayed there, they paid jizya, they ran out of money, then they were not allowed to work in Mosul, and what they did, they sell their golds, they sell the furniture to pay the jizya. So when they run out of everything, ISIS militant come back and said, okay, we need to collect the jizya. They said, okay, we don't have any more money, and you don't allow us to work. They said, okay, then we have to take your daughter or your son. So that happened. That literally happened under jizya. So if you stay in a Mosul or anywhere to pay jizya, if you run out of money, you are not allowed to work, to afford to pay jizya, then your son will be taken, your daughter will be taken, and if those are taken, eventually they will take you as well. So family fled from Mosul, leaving a couple of children behind because they said, okay, we will pay jizya and we can survive. No, they didn't survive.
Sure. Give example. Okay, thank you. Sherry, would you give us some insights into what happened to the Yezidi?
Sure. So my organization, Seed Foundation, is based in Kurdistan, and I live there. I'm here for the summer to tell the story, so thank you so much for including me.
Thanks for coming.
I mean, you heard the pain here. When I started working on Iraq, it was 10 years. It was 1998, and it was 10 years after the last genocide, the Unfall campaign. And it was very fresh and very raw. My work focuses on rebuilding the inside, the people, the dignity, their souls, rebuilding, coping, functioning, all of the social needs that this community now has coping with the genocide. As Perry said, there was a targeted genocide against the Yezidi people. There was a war against other minorities. They indentured thousands of women and children, we talked about the numbers, into modern-day slavery. Hundreds of thousands of people were affected by this violence. There was torture. There was killings. There were killings in the town with witnesses. People watched their family members. Huge, huge loss of life, displacement.
The men were gathered together, and they had no idea at first what was coming on August 3rd, 2014.
They separated the men and the women. They executed the men and took many of the adolescent boys to be child soldiers. They took women and girls and young boys into slavery, and girls as young as 6 were sexually abused. Even boys as young as 6 were sexually abused by ISIS. They were terrorized. They were sold. They were moved from house to house. They never knew what would happen. And we call the impact of this complex trauma, because when you don't know what's going to happen and you have prolonged exposure to life-threatening, horrific violence, it's very different than one incident happening. And I would say that the people that survived continue to suffer with complex trauma because they don't know about the status of their loved ones.
We'll get into that in a little bit.
I mean, will close with one point, which is that we need to be not just remembering, but also very worried because the seeds of this continue. Sectarian and religious intolerance, lack of rule of law, lack of pluralism of any sort, disenfranchise of specific communities. The Yazidi community was long disenfranchised. The Sunni community, the disenfranchisement of that community, you could say, sowed the seeds here. A culture of institutionalized violence and persecution of the other. And all of these things remain full in force in Iraq.
Okay, thanks. Doug, where were you on August 3rd, 2014? You were at the State Department. Tell us about what you witnessed there.
I'm in the Office of International Religious Freedom. At the time, I was the head of our Middle East team. August 3rd was a Sunday, I believe. And on August 3rd, we received an enormous number of phone calls, text messages, and emails from Yazidi friends all over the country and all over the world. Our office has had close relationships with Yazidi community for a very long time, as well as with the Syrian community and with other minority communities in Iraq. And actually, we had been tracking, you know, as with many other people at the State Department, many people in the audience today, my colleagues from the Near Eastern Affairs Bureau and USAID and DOD, we had all been watching the sort of crisis and the horror unfold ever since the fall of Fallujah earlier in the year, and we've been meeting with Yazidis and others all through the spring and summer, trying to sort of understand the situation on the ground. Of course, we all understood the daily disenfranchisement, as Sherry describes it, and the sort of daily struggle of being a member of a marginalized community. We were well acquainted with that. We report on that in our human rights report. We understand that that in itself is a condition, a groundwork upon which conflict and violence and violent extremism emerge. Right, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you have a lot of social maladies can come from that. Including economic deprivation and other kinds of things, gender problems with gender relations. So a lot of the problems are there, but we'd also been tracking sort of an uptick in violence, and we understood that ISIS was getting closer and closer to some of these communities. And on August 3rd, which is when August 3rd was a sort of major day for us, because we heard about the attack on Sinjar directly from Yazidi communities, and at about 8:30 in the morning on August 4th, in the office on Monday morning, we met with a couple of dozen Yazidi Americans in an effort to understand very clearly exactly what was happening, exactly where people had gone, exactly who had been taken, and what was happening. And we continued to meet with Yazidis from all over the country for weeks and weeks, of course. But more important than that, we began to understand that working again with our colleagues at DOD and at the White House and at Near Eastern Affairs Bureau and places like the Office of Global Criminal Justice, which handles accountability at the State Department, we had this opportunity to derive a great deal of information from these communities, from our contacts on Mount Sinjar, and understand better the landscape of the sort of unfolding catastrophe, where people were, where civilians were hiding, where they were safe, where they were not safe, and exactly how they were trying to get off the mountain. And that relationship that we forged during those weeks after this happened, and the ability we had to communicate with one another across the U.S. interagency, as we call it, across the U.S. government, and with NGO partners, and with the Iraqi government and the KRG, allowed us to understand the situation and also act on it better.
Now, ISIS attacked Kocho on the 15th
That's correct.
of August, so it was almost 10 days, whatever, it's almost 2 weeks later. And in that's the village of Nadi Murad, so it's been well documented, but there were also hundreds of murders there of the men and hundreds of the women taken out. And the whole town evacuated. Either they tried to run through Sinjar. How could that happen? How was that possible when the U.S. had already initiated airstrikes a week before then?
I am not an expert in hostage recovery or how that works, but I know it's very, very difficult, and that those were conversations that were had. It's an extraordinary difficult thing.
To prevent. You
prevent
had it was already underway.
Well, we knew that these areas were being held by ISIS. There was no ability to forecast exactly when an atrocity would happen or where it would happen, although Kojo was always a place of great concern to all of us. And the day that massacre happened was a truly horrific day obviously for Nadia and her family and for other friends of ours. But it was a very difficult day as we heard in very short order the story that was unfolding there. The question of how you prevent something like that in real time is a very good question. It's not one that I'm qualified to answer, but it is an extraordinarily difficult. And we saw hostage recovery. We've seen hostage recovery efforts.
This wasn't even recovery. This was already a genocide underway.
Well, it began on August 3rd.
Right, but on August 15th was when
they separated the men, and they shot them in a ditch.
Yeah. Okay. So could you each tell us a little bit about your own organizations and what you're doing to help the recovery at this point, to give relief? Do you want to start?
Sure. So SEED works on mental health, so comprehensive services for survivors of violence, not exclusively Yazidis, but predominant number of our clients, 85% are Yazidi survivors. And that's men, women, and children. We provide psychotherapy, long-term, 4 to 6 months is the average client served. Comprehensive case management services, helping them get medical care, getting access to mental health services, housing, resettlement, legal and protection. Many of the survivors continue to be in danger even after there is violence in the home. They could be exploited. Vulnerable people are often exploited. And building social support networks. So we help try to improve people's overall well-being. The second thing that we do is we focus on building capacity of local service providers through education and training programs. We have a Center for Mental Health and Psychosocial Support Service, training on trauma psychology and comprehensive care. We work on policies and laws, and we work with the government in Kurdistan to improve protections for vulnerable people and to improve government services, because the NGOs alone can't do this. So we must partner with government to address the needs of these communities. And finally, we work very specifically on trafficking, combating human trafficking and modern slavery. We do that with the Yazidi community, but we also have local trafficking. So this year we'll be opening a shelter for trafficking survivors.
Where is that going to be?
In Erbil.
Great. Perry, what are the priorities of the Free Yazidi Foundation at this point for the Yazidi community of Iraq?
Well, our whole community has been traumatized, from young children up to adults. And that's the effect of a genocide, that's the effect of sexual violence. And so not only the women and girls that come back, but at our center, all women get treatment from experts outside of Iraq. We give livelihoods training and educational courses to make sure that our women and girls become much stronger and powerful and become a voice for their community. Aside from work on the ground, of course, we do a lot of advocacy, making sure that we're always on the table with the State Department, because in the future, change can happen. One thing that we do is also looking for justice. We have a victim-centric approach when it comes to justice. We explain what justice means to the victims, because a lot of things have been promised to our victims that are not true, and we need to make sure that we do not lie to and don't bring up hope with victims, because some of the survivors, they will never get justice because the perpetrator is dead in Syria or in Iraq. But there are a lot of them also in jail in Kurdistan or Iraq, and we, as Free Yazidi Foundation, can at this moment identify perpetrators who are in jail in Kurdistan and the survivors are there, but the road to justice is not yet set. We have been having talks with the Kurdish government regarding this. They told us that they are now internally working out how to make sure Yazidis could get justice. We're also talking with the Office of the SRSG on Sexual Violence and Conflict from the United Nations, and they are also having talks with the government to make sure that justice does happen. Because one thing that we have to realize is that without justice, there can never be reconciliation. If the Yazidi women and girls point out that their neighbor raped them, or their neighbor was the one pointing out the Yazidi houses, then how can we ever say to Yazidis, yes, come, we'll rebuild Sinjar, and then you can go back with your family and live in Sinjar? They will never do that. The ambassador, I think, was talking about Yazidis want revenge. If there's no justice, Yazidis will get revenge. And I'll tell you right now, Yazidis will commit murders, because if they have to live with the people who raped their daughters, who killed their fathers, who get away with these crimes.
Justice is absolutely essential for a rule of law society.
Yes.
Absolutely. Is the Free Yazidi Foundation going around taking testimonies or and documenting these cases, or are you mostly involved in advocacy?
I think we have to all be aware that just taking testimonies will not make sure that this is admissible in court.
Right.
The Free Yazidi Foundation asks 3 or 4 questions to the victims with psychologists and lawyers. The questions that we ask is, where were you? Who did you see? Were they high level, mid level? These kind of questions. After that, together with lawyers and other people from our staff, we can identify, okay, did he have different kind of names, nom de guerre, and what was his real name? Because some of these girls have been living with these perpetrators for 3 years or even more. So they have a lot of information. They have pictures, etc. After we have that information, we then identify the perpetrators and look around for where they are. We have given names to a couple of governments and getting feedback regarding those names. So
many of our audience are involved in the defense of human rights for the minorities in Iraq and elsewhere. And one of our frustrations is trying to get documentation. Where can we all go for case documentation in English? Is there such a source that you know?
You mean specific cases on
Yeah,
Yazidis?
yeah. In English, is there anything out there on the internet, for example?
Well, at the moment, I know that the ASG that was appointed after the resolution at the UN will do a thorough research on what happened to the Yazidi community and other minorities, specifically the attacks of ISIS. Then we will really have something that is admissible in court one day if they choose to do that. So
that process is just beginning.
That process is just beginning. I know that organizations have been doing some testimonies and research, what has been going on, but unfortunately, this also turns into that some of the women and girls try to make their story more, how do you say that, sensationalistic,
Yes.
to be able to reach the top so that they can be visible and share the story of their people.
Yeah, accuracy
and that
is really
is
important.
not necessary, shouldn't be necessary.
Right.
But
Sure. What about the Christian side? Is there anyone tracking the testimonies? I know a lot of the Christians have left the area, the region. They're leaving. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit. How they're leaving, the numbers, and if anyone's getting their testimony about their experience, what happened to them with ISIS, and even before ISIS, because this is a problem of persecution that preceded ISIS. I know in Mosul it was very, very violent in 06, 08, bishops being murdered and priests being murdered and bombs going off inside of churches full of worshippers.
Syrian society established since 1991. I will start to say there was a crisis when Saddam Hussein attacked northern Iraq, and the situation was the same. So our people, they suffering since that time until this moment, and before that. After 2003, unfortunately, we still been targeted, our people, all the minorities, but indigenous people, of course, Assyrian, Christian, they've been targeted in Mosul city since 2004, and in Baghdad, a lot of churches been targeted. There was a movement of people from Baghdad, from other cities to Nineveh Plain and to Duhok, Erbil, KRG. And this movement in beginning was especially from Baghdad and Mosul. Later, it was increased to Christian in Basra and other places. There was about 1,500 people being kidnapped and killed. Over 3,000 to 4,000 they've been kidnapped and released after they pay for those militias who targeting Christian targeting.
How many families do you think that affected? Hundreds, thousands?
Yeah, of course, there was 1.5 million or 1,600,000 Christian from different churches living in the country in 2003. Now there's less than 300,000 living in the country. Baghdad was one of the cities housing about 600 to 700,000. Now there's, I can give you an example that Church of East used to have like 7 churches. Now they have 3 churches in service. Chaldean Church, they used to have 25 churches in Baghdad. They have a lot of churches closed. And
the Chaldean Patriarch has recently said there's 100,000 Christians left in Iraq.
There's no exact estimation. All they depend on the numbers they have from the local churches.
And they're still leaving.
Yeah, and until this moment, I get a message yesterday. They said that every week there's about 12, 20 families from Baghdad and those regions, which are more stable if you compare to Tel Aviv and other places. People they leaving because they lost the hope. And even with the aid we provide with other organizations, but our people they've been housed by the churches and the local organization more than the government and United Nations. We didn't feel that even there was a discrimination in this site. So people don't trust until this moment to return back to Mosul city. And I will give you example from Mosul. I have people, they return back to Mosul to try to return back to their homes, and their neighbor, they said, why you are returning back here? I have another story from a person who have a home, and he want to return back his home. There was people who capturing the home, and they have support from the force, the local forces there, and they refused to leave the home. Even the government, they established a committee to solve those problems, but there are still thousands of properties and homes belong to our people in Mosul city, especially. They've been occupied, and the people can't return back to them because of different reasons.
So what is the Syrian Aid Society doing for them?
Of course, we try to bring awareness. We attend a meeting with the Human Rights Council because we are since 2011 with ECOSOC, special consultative.
Have they been helpful?
They write reports, but still nothing. But and for when United States announced the genocide, we wrote reports and we do interview with people. With Night of Columbus. So
are your reports available in English?
Yes. Most of our reports are in English. We have estimation.
On your website, or?
We can send if anyone requests. We send. Yeah, we have estimation exactly how many people left in 2014. Current situation now, like how many people they are still living in Duhok and Erbil. They didn't return back. There's camps still in Baghdad and in Duhok and Erbil.
What percentage of Christians have returned to their villages?
So it's not the same level. It's about in whole Nineveh Plain, it's about 50% only. So it was in Nineveh Plain, it was about 140 to 150,000. Now we have about 65 to 70,000. But of course, in Mosul, the percent, there's only a few families they return back, and there's some older people, they return back to Mosul city.
Okay, yeah. Louis, is that consistent with your findings?
Yeah, that's true. But I just want to mention that about documenting the atrocities and crimes. There are a lot of NGOs on the ground, for example, Hammurabi, Shlomo, and one of them is Syrian Aid Society, that they do this work. But they don't take it to the level of professionalism, Nina. You know, like because we spoke with, for example, Greg Stanton, the Genocide Watch, and he said, and he said those people, those organizations, they need training from the international community. So they need like American team or UN appointed team or anybody who can go there so they can train them how to document, how to register, how to talk to families, what type of interview they should have to be able to document this, and not only keep it in your computer. If somebody wanted, you send it. Put it online so anybody go there, like Christian genocide, Yezidi genocide, numbers, so they can come up in a Google search. This is the problem, that was nobody able to do that. And I hope the Security Council Resolution 2379, that they will be able to, by appointing somebody, they did, to Iraqi government, to collect some crimes and all things that, how can we train those NGOs that they are so important for documenting, because those NGOs, they are on the ground talking to the families in daily basis. So this is important.
And I think Harry made a great point, which is that there's two levels of documentation. There's the legal, admissible in court documentation, which is a very complex process and slow and expensive, and you're probably going to get the best, you know, the worst cases, thinking like a lawyer.
Yeah. So
and then there's just the, you know, reporting, the documentation that the public needs to really understand what the depth of the genocide, what happened to people, why the problems they're facing now.
I think for the people who want to know more about Yezidis, they can read the reports made by the Commission on Syria, They Came to Destroy, written by Sarita Asraf, and also they can read from, she's also my board member, Naomi Kikola from the U.S. Holocaust Museum, Our Generation is Gone. Mm-hmm. And you can read why it was a genocide, who was targeted, and...
Mm-hmm. Doug, what about your office? Are you doing this are you involved at all in this kind of tracking or teaching or, you know, trying to
very much
organize the aftermath of this?
So we've done, the Religious Freedom Office is part of the broader Human Rights Bureau at the State Department, and we've funded, for a very long time, we've funded training in forensics and that kind of thing for years, and I believe we still do. We have a number of ongoing programs in Iraq, but recently at the ministerial, Vice President Pence announced that we would be ramping up a lot of that funding with the Genocide Recovery and Persecution Response Program, and with a $5 million program that's going to be run out of our Global Criminal Justice Office to promote accountability and investigations of these crimes. And we'll also be contributing to the UNSCR 2379 fund as it is implemented. So all of these, I think, will go to support this issue, and DRL will keep doing some of its work on the ground as well.
I hope you focus on the lay level as well as the criminal court level.
That's actually a really good point. I mean, our office itself actually reports on this. We have an annual religious freedom report, and we actually document, not in exhaustively, because the report's not intended to be exhaustive, but illustratively report on these issues, both in that report and
but I mean, developing the information to begin with to help with that.
And other NGOs do. Yazda's got a very good report on this. Others have reported on it. So there's a number of ways in which we are trying to report on this particular issue. I will say, just briefly, on the issue of recovery and reconstruction, this is a very difficult issue, obviously, but there are security and structural impediments that remain in place. It's still very, very difficult for people to come from a position of displacement back to their homes. There are checkpoints at which they are blocked by security forces, both Kurdish, Iraqi security, and PMF forces, where they have simply turned back. They aren't allowed to get through. And these are the reports we receive, and we have We're very concerned. We're very grateful for all of the hospitality that and all of the work the Iraqi government and the Kurdish regional government have shown and done to on this problem. But we really need to fix some of these issues as they go back. One of the issues, of course, is IEDs, and we are also, I think we've added another $17 million for demining. That was something Vice President Pence also announced at the ministerial. So those are sort of shorter-term, non-programmatic issues that
Where is the demining taking place? Is it in Nineveh province?
There's demining taking place throughout the region and throughout Iraq, and it's a very large program.
Because I know there's like towns and fields outside of Karmelesh. I've heard about that as one of the Christian towns in Nineveh Plain. Also, I know that the Yezidi areas, the demining is a very big problem before people can get back, and especially into not only into their homes, but to till the fields.
That's right. And so I was just in the Balkans a few weeks ago, and there are still fields roped off where you can't go anywhere. And this is 20-something years later. So this is a problem, and it has to be dealt with, and it is being dealt with. But it's a very, very complicated and expensive and time-consuming one to do.
While we're on security, are you hearing about ISIS? Is that a serious threat at this point, or I know there's sporadic?
ISIS is not dead globally.
But in Iraq?
Or
in this region in particular?
Well, it's certainly been beaten down, but we still, of course, I think we all have heard reports of attacks and of threats. We've certainly beaten them back and defeated them militarily. But again, the conditions, the political conditions, the social conditions, the cultural conditions, the lack of reconciliation, the lack of accountability. Criminal accountability is an extraordinarily important issue, but criminal accountability alone does not give us communities that can live with one another. So this is, and Sherry spoke wonderfully to this, and Pari has as well. This is an issue that has to be dealt with as well. ISIS may be gone, but something like ISIS could come back.
We'll get to that. On the security issue, do any of you want to jump in? You go ahead, Louis.
The security issue, it's really the huge concern. For example, when the Iraqi people protested in Baghdad, Basra, elsewhere, between Salah ad-Din and Nineveh province, there was a ISIS parade over there, like ISIS with some flags, and I saw some reports. Also, the Arab tribe spokesperson called on Iraqi government to conduct strikes or send forces to stop them. Also, they called also on the international coalition to conduct strikes immediately because ISIS is trying to show up again and to come back with large. So Iraqi forces, ISF and Hashd al-Sha'bi Kanaf is busy with what's happening in Baghdad. And also Peshmerga, it's on the north side, protecting the borders and doing that. I think I'm maybe wrong, but if the situation goes like this and lack of security, vacuum of power over there, we will see another emergence of those.
What about beyond ISIS? Is Iran, I understand that Iran has been active in this area as well.
I mean, like...
Bartella, there's a
Bartella,
Khomeini school.
There's a Khomeini school, and I think he knows that. And also there is a lot of, in everywhere you go, in where areas where PMU controls, you see Khomeini flags, Imam Ali flags, all these things. Like the sign of Iran is on the ground. It's very clear to everybody. But the point is, like, how can you stop that? And what is our leverage or U.S. leverage to change that?
I would think we would have a lot of leverage.
So this is, but I mean, like, can we change that reality on the ground? There's no government. There's nothing over there. Everybody's trying to form a government. Nobody's able because you need to bring coalitions together. So it's a very complicated situation. Iraq doesn't have the tools to do that. So they really need the international community support or State Department or U.S. to give them a guide of what to do themselves, because they are lost in nowhere, like in the middle of nowhere.
I'd like to know what the panelists think. Should the U.S. stay in Iraq? Or should
that is essential. Like, if the U.S. leaves, if the coalition is not there, we are going back to the era maybe more worse than ISIS, because we will see if for example, he's mentioning that there's no reconciliation, There is nothing over there done for the communities, for the forces.
I mean, militarily.
Militarily, yeah. U.S. should stay. Without U.S. There, we will face more problems.
Do you all agree? How do the Yezidis feel? Let's go down the line. Yeah, go ahead, Ashok.
I think in the security situation, it's more divided than other things in Nineveh Plain. And
more what?
Divided. So there's many local forces and different authorities. Some of them connected to different groups, and they have different agendas. And this is what affecting the situation of normal life of the people, and making some people didn't be able to send their student to University of Mosul, like example. They affecting their normal life, daily life. And current situation now, we have in Tel Kef, like example, and forces named Babylon.
Babylon Brigades.
Babylon Brigades. Yeah. Now they have 10% maybe Christian, and 90% are from different groups. But I heard stories that the member of ISIS, they joined this force to cover themselves, to protect themselves.
Now, the Chaldean bishop this week issued a statement, a 10-point statement on Iraq, saying, particularly focused on the security situation, calling for the integration of these, of the armed forces into governmental force, and to disarm these various militias.
Yeah. So the solution is
that a practical solution?
No, the solution is to give the level of the security authority to people from the ground, to include all the component of all the represent from all the communities, like Christian, Yezidis, and to establish one united force with the Iraqi government, remove other forces, including Peshmerga, including Hashd al-Shabi, all those levels, and they can use the term of National Guard. Why we said this? Because when ISIS enter the region, nobody protect this region. Iraqi's army, they fled, Peshmerga fled, so they don't have a chance to defend themselves. If our people, local community, have their own weapons they have on their forces, they will protect themselves. And we have examples in Amarli and other places. When the local community have their force, they defend and they stay. Nobody captured their lands. And since 2003 until 2014, we asked everyone to support our people to have their local forces. We didn't succeed to get this. There was all the time other decisions to the region. So it's important now to have this. If this not happen, of course, this need international protection, and need, if America will not send troops on the ground, so we need the monitoring. United States monitoring is important to neutralize the region and establish this force.
Okay, thank you. Sherry, Parry, do you have anything to comment on this?
Sure. I mean, I just remember 2 years ago,
point of view.
being on I'll give my point of view. Being on a panel 2 years ago talking about political accommodation, and nothing has changed since 2 years ago, since the last RFI panel on this exact topic. And I think, it's so important that the U.S. not just remain, but also deepen their commitment, because we've seen this before. We saw al-Qaeda in the late 2000s. That was a result of a political vacuum. It is, or a lack of full political participation. It's easy to deal with a strong leader in Baghdad, and Iraqis are familiar with that. But it's not what's going to bring all of the communities of Iraq together. And so the more we empower a single person, a dynamic personality, a charismatic personality, and somebody who seems like they have it together, the less likely we are to build institutions and to build political accommodation that people need to feel safe. We talked last week at the ministerial about early warning systems. We don't have one in Iraq. Even if we put one in place, who would respond? And so we need it to be a priority for the Iraqi government to not only hear what's happening, but also to be able to alert these mechanisms that they actually respond. I think that in the Kurdistan region, there are things that we can do, but the Kurdistan region's doors have been open to people that need protection. So I think what we need to do is think about mechanisms where international communities, can bolster the Iraqi response because the warning signs were there.
Thank you. Perry, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I do want to add a couple of points because when this happened to the Yezidis lost trust in everyone. The Iraqi government, the Kurdish government, just everyone in general. They do not know who to trust and who they can trust. And this rebuilding of trust will take many, many years. My brother himself from Holland went on a plane to get to Mount Sinjar and started fighting against ISIS. Yes, Yezidis want self-protection because there is no trust anymore. One thing that happened when President Bush started to come to Iraq, everyone was happy because then finally we would get rid of Saddam, the person I fled for in 1991. When President Obama started to say that they will take away the boots on the ground and leave Iraq and make sure that Iraq themselves can take care of the country, at that point everything failed because at that point you gave room to hate and violence and extremism against minorities. At that point, the minorities were left alone, not Iraq. It were the minorities that suffered afterwards. At that point, ISIS started to grow because ISIS was not built in one day. If you look at the reports and documentations, ISIS was already growing for many years. And it should have been that America should never have left Iraq. Do we want America to stay and come to Iraq and have their soldiers? Yes, because then minorities will feel safer, and then you answer the security question. How can we protect minorities at this moment? If no one trusts the Iraqi government, if no one trusts the militia, the military, or the Kurdish one, then you leave them at their own stake. And as we saw in 2014, on 3 August, Yezidis cannot do that themselves because they have nothing.
I think there's an emerging consensus on that point on this panel on the minorities. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to turn to the audience. And that is, Vice President Pence has made a clear stand that he has changed U.S. policy, that he wants to see the minorities who have often been marginalized, in some cases entirely marginalized, in the aid programs of the UN, to receive direct aid and to start seeing effective UN programs help. And I just want to go down the line and hear your own experience, from your own vantage point. Are you getting aid? Have you been getting aid? What kind of aid have you, from the sources? What's your source of aid? Sherry, why don't you start?
So the U.S. government is a large donor of the Seed Foundation. We've received support from the U.S. State Department. Our assistance is focused on delivering comprehensive services to survivors of violence, prevention through and building capacity of local service providers to and the government to respond to the needs that exist. That support has been consistent. I will say we are a local NGO in Kurdistan. I also have a U.S. NGO here, but it's the local organization that does all the work. And it's extremely challenging to receive these grant mechanisms. We have excellent partners in the State Department, but I could see why it's very challenging for local, small, new entities that were created in response to this crisis to receive funding, because the requirements for high level of accountability, a high level of impact, high level of reporting and communications that is required to implement a U.S. government grant is challenging. And so I think for the large NGOs that are working in Iraq, they're all required to support local NGOs, but they don't spend enough time there, not long enough there to build capacity. So this is one of the things that SEED is working on helping build capacity of our peer organizations to serve the need of the population, because this won't be the last crisis. We know that, and we need to transition to a crisis response.
Harry?
Well, I started the Free Yezidi Foundation alone when I was 25 with €300. So basically, how can I ever apply for a grant from the US State Department? But now, after 4 years, we've been growing, and now we have finally managed to get the people in place to apply for that. So so now that we know that the State Department and
you're hopeful.
Yeah, now we're hopeful.
Telescoping out for the Yazidi community at large, are you seeing the UN development projects take effect in Sinjar, for example? Well, I know. Is there water? Is there electricity? Is the rubble gone? Has that kind of basic infrastructure aid gone into that region?
Well, I mean, from many we hear that if they want to bring aid towards there or want to be rebuilt, that there's not a chance given to start the process because the borders get close in front of them. So that is a big issue. But this will take many years. It won't be in 1 day or 2 days. When we don't work on the mass graves, when we have not finished the IEDs, then we cannot start the rebuilding process.
Are most of the Yazidis in camps still?
Yes, over 400,000 Yazidis, and people are just...
All 400,000 Yazidis are in camps.
And they just want to leave Iraq. They don't see a future in Sinjar.
Way?
Nina, thank you so much for the Mike Pence's initiative. Like when he says no longer aid will go to UN or we will shift our aid directly to the NGOs. We haven't seen so far a large-scale aid coming to those areas. We've been seeing some grants given to, for example, Seed Foundation and others, and I know some of them also. But this is not only the thing that we are waiting for the U.S. to support, because we in Iraq Haven believe that we need to bring private sectors in the area. For example, we want to build special secured economic zones that 4 of them were called on the Iraq and on the Kuwait conference. 4 of them that they need a Kuwait conference was called.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So this is what we want. We want the aid is not enough. Bringing pillow, blankets, food is really not enough for the people. 60,000 people has went back to the Nineveh Plain. There was a sign in Karakosh, some of them holding a sign in the front of the Hajj al-Sha'bi headquarters and governorate headquarters saying, we need the jobs. Mm-hmm. Okay, you send people 50,000, 60,000, send them back. Okay, what is the point for sending back if they cannot restore their dignity, they cannot have a jobs, security.
So you're saying seed money for business loans to...
Yeah. For example, you need to start to build the infrastructure. Mm-hmm. You need to start to create jobs. Mm-hmm. You need to.
But is there electricity and water to sustain that economy?
For example, I mean, if U.S. put $50 million, $10 million in the building special secure economic zones, there are other states like Denmark, like Hungary, which is very committed to do that. Mm-hmm. So they want to see first U.S. leadership on the ground, and they will invest. So we need to convince others that not only U.S. can do it, like we need to bring other donors internationally from Europe and other places to come and invest to build. Yeah, so the aid
might be a hard sell until the security issue is...
So that's our plan. It's a part of building special secured economic zones. So we have also security plan within that. So we were part of BAA of USAID in Baghdad, and they asked us to give them the innovative proposals that can sustain for a long time, which we did. But unfortunately, a lot of NGOs were not given the money or grants to do that thing. So I hope that USAID or State Department will look back to those proposals and the way of how to create jobs, how to create security.
That's all playing out, I suppose, now. Ashur, do you want to have a last word on this issue?
Yeah, we are welcome the announcement of Vice President Mike Pence about sending and delivering fund to the local minorities or people in Nineveh Plain and Sinjar and other places. But of course, until this moment, as you mentioned, we apply, but we didn't receive the fund from the USAID. Most of fund we get, it was from our communities who living in outside the country in United States,
private aid,
in Australia, other places, and with different churches, with some government like Canada, Estonia, as a Syrian society, we get fund before from USAID. But last few years we get nothing, and the important thing is that we should understand that the situation in Nineveh Plain and Sinjar is different than other places because already there was discrimination. Even they didn't give the budget is important to make development since 2003 until 2014. Before that, of course, it was a discrimination again, but after that, Iraqi's government didn't succeed to make development. Even the region was more secure than other places if you compare like south of Mosul and other places, but still the government didn't spend enough money to build infrastructure. And one of the reasons that people were leaving the region even before ISIS entered to the region was they depend on the resources of water, like example in north side of Nineveh Plain and south side of Nineveh Plain from other places which connected to Mosul. And this is still, until this moment, those projects not completed the maintenance of water system and electricity. There's shortage in electricity in the region. And the other important thing is ISIS, they targeting the society, they destroying as much as they be able homes. So percent of destruction in Nineveh Plain, especially in Christian villages and towns, is more than other places if you compare. So we have around 14,000 homes are affected, some of them totally destroyed and some partially, and all the activities that the government and other organizations did until this moment, it was only targeting water, schools, but nobody take care of the homes, only church and some organization connected to churches.
Well, I know that the Knights of Columbus, Aid to the Church in Need,
Yes.
Some of those groups, Samaritan's Purse, has been very...
Samaritan Purse,
I think some of these refugees, these displaced, would have starved to death without that, but because Congressman Chris Smith has had several hearings on this very issue, and the lawyer for the Chaldean Church that cares for most of the Christian displaced from Nineveh testified twice, and they said that they received no food aid, for example, from the UN. The UN insisted that any Christian or Yezidi who wants help can get it inside their large camps.
Yeah.
But there's a great deal of trepidation on the part of the minorities from going into those camps because they're infiltrated by ISIS. Is what I have, what he testified to, and there are simply no camps for Christians there at all.
And I can give an example for that. We have a dormitory in the Hook. We use it for IDPs. We receive a lot of IDPs, especially from Mosul. In the beginning, when Christians leave Mosul,
the displaced
from
Mosul.
Yezidis, yes. And after a long time that we need to use the dormitory, we get fund and we built a camp for them. So government didn't do anything, and United Nations do nothing. We built a camp, and still we have people there. They cannot leave, return back to Mosul, and we cannot force them to go out from the camp. But taking care of camps it's not a easy responsibility to a small organization or local organization. It's important to find a way to find a solution for stability for those people.
So I'm going to ask the audience if they have any questions, but first think about your questions first and who do you want to direct it to. I received one for Perry from the audience. Perry, what are the first and most important things the Yezidis need from the KRG and the Iraqi government, and what can the U.S. do to help? So that's a big question, but maybe you can answer it very succinctly so we can get to others.
Well, I wonder who asked this question. I mean, there's a lot of things and issues that happen in Iraq and Kurdistan that affect minorities a lot. I think one of them is the hate speech that's spread by religious leaders. There should be an end to that. If Yezidis are giving alarm signals or pointing out that these things happen, and Yezidis have done that and been doing that, and I think also Christians have mentioned it, then governments like Iraq and Kurdistan, they should make an end to that. Because it all happens there, and I've discussed many times with Bayan from the KRG about this, that education is very important, that young generation should be educated on who lives in Iraq and who lives in Kurdistan and what kind of different religions, so that there can be peace among them and friendship instead of hatred towards each other. We see a lot of inequality, hatred on low level. If a government hears about this, there should be action, because if you close your eyes, you give the person who's doing this more power to go on with this. This is a big issue within the Yazidi community. They've seen it many times. Sometimes they're unable to speak about it because they're afraid that nothing might be done for them. So I've had the conversation many times with the KRG on how can we make sure that the Yazidis can go to officials and file a complaint against hatred, discrimination, or inequality at the workplace or anywhere. And these are issues. They need to be tackled for minorities to live in peace in an environment like Iraq, Kurdistan. I think that is one big thing, but also one thing that we really are concerned about is a political voice for the Yazidis. In 2014, we had one member in parliament, and that was Vian Dakhil. She tried to raise the voice of the Yazidis at that time in the Iraqi parliament. But has much been changed since then? No, because it's still one person, one or two, and they changed. But the Kurdish regional government should also have people, Yazidis, in place in the parliament. Giving a voice to Yazidis will make sure that they can stress the things that are happening in their community.
Right. Representative Rahman mentioned the importance of education and the culture of tolerance, which is what you just said, and I've heard it from all the various religious leaders in Iraq, among the minority, persecuted minorities.
Could I say one thing?
Yeah.
Real quick on her point on minority access, minority members, individuals' ability to access the government. I think that's a really important point. And it's probably a point that a lot of Iraqi citizens may feel like they don't know where to go if they have a problem that requires a government intervention or government response. It could be very mundane. It could be something very, very important and very big or very dangerous. But one of the things the UN Special Rapporteur on Minorities in a report on Iraq last year noted was just this point. There's no sort of infrastructure, or not a very strong infrastructure for individual minority members to be able to access government and feel safe about that.
Well, in a democracy, Doug, your representative, your political representative is supposed to represent your interests.
You can also go to the police. I can also go to my police station and get help there. Right?
True.
You know?
True, but if all else fails, you go to your political representative and complain. And the Small Wars Journal had an excellent article that I recommend to everyone about how the recent elections in May were absolutely catastrophic for the minorities.
Can I add one?
Yeah.
Only one example of how the situation is, even in Iraqi's parliament, like they choose the committee for election. So they add 2 persons to that to include Assyrian and Turkoman, Christian and Turkoman. And when they add those 2 seats, they put a condition that they will not have a right to vote. So they increase from 9 to 11 to include and to give the right to other minorities or other people who live in Iraq, but still they didn't give them a right to vote. Mm-hmm. So if the Iraqi parliament deal in this way, how will be the situation with others? And we all watched the last election, and we saw how they captured the quota seats. Mm-hmm. So Shia parties and
lack of representation.
Yeah, and some Kurdish parties, they push some people get those seats. So from 5 seats, 2 they went to Kurd parties and 2 to Shia's parties in reality, or they follow those parties. So, and now still in KRG, they didn't accept to have a special list for the Assyrian Chaldean. There was a protest before a few days in front of KRG parliament. We hope that they will accept this request, because in Iraq, Now they allow this to the next election.
Okay, so yeah, let's start here. Could you please identify yourself and wait for the microphone, and if you can, direct your question to a particular.
Sure. Lori Milroy, Kurdistan 24. I have a question for Perry, and I also want to say your comments were extremely moving, and I hope that they will lead to some real action. My question for you, though, from your description of the violence against the Yazidis, including the Yazidi women and girls, it sounds like a lot of that was carried out by local Iraqis and not by foreigners. Is that correct?
Well, if you look at the papers, it says that over 5,000 foreigners were in Iraq and Syria committing horrible crimes with ISIS. Some of them have already returned to where they come from. But when you say local, do you mean exactly Sinjar, or do you mean in the area of just Iraq?
I mean that what Americans do is blame this violence on some vague ideology that is carried out by some vague global entity, rather than look carefully at the people who are committing these acts of rape and pillage, which I believe, from my understanding, in the case of Iraq, including Sinjar and the Yazidi areas, are Iraqis. We don't understand the problem properly, so we don't address it properly. That is my
Well, I know that Amnesty International has documented that most of the men buying the slaves in the Mosul slave market were local boys and men. Yeah.
Yeah, that is true. But we should not forget that even if there's one foreigner, we should also point him out.
Okay, question over here. There was a question over here. Yeah, sir.
Namo Abdullah with Rudao. So my question is for Mr. Padgett of the Department of State. Can you please give us an update or any more details on what Vice President Pence announced at the conference, the religious fund?
Sure. I mean,
has there been any donors from the private sector or other countries? And also, can we assume that a top priority of this fund will be to support the Yazidis? Thanks.
The last question first. You can certainly assume that. That is an enormously important priority. The Genocide Recovery and Persecution Response Program is going to be implemented by USAID. It's intended to do very local, very grassroots, household level support for the victims of genocide. I don't have any numbers on other donors for the Religious Freedom Fund or how that's actually going to work. I know USAID is going to have an implementer for this program with expertise on the ISIS genocide specifically, and have a demonstrated ability to distribute the funds in Iraq. In other words, we are not going to get an implementer who has no experience with Iraq or with this crisis, right? It has to be somebody with that kind of experience. And then just, I mean, I think I already said most of what I could say. $17 million extra for demining. We already do a lot. $5 million for accountability and justice. And we're also going to be contributing to the UNSCR fund. And there's probably some other things that I'm not remembering.
Okay, we have time for one last question, just a few seconds on the end here. And please identify yourself and take the mic.
Ken Joseph with the Syrian Christians. I just want to have one positive side. I remember many years ago we were meeting with the foreign minister and we're discussing the Assyrians, and he said one very simple point. He said, get your area. He said, no one is going to give you your rights. No one is going to help you. You need your land. And he said it's better to have own your small home than rent a big mansion. I just wanted to get a general consensus. The Prime Minister a while back said to us, get an area. The Prime Minister can establish it legally as a security zone. Get your security, get your infrastructure, bring your people back, take a vote, and have in a Syrian Christian area like Kurdistan. I just want to know what the consensus for that is. Is it possible? Is it, an unreasonable dream? Thank you.
Anybody object to that?
Well, I mean, even if you have in Iraqi parliament 10 or 15 seats for the Christians, Yezidis, they still can do nothing because the entire parliament itself is not functioning. Iraqi government didn't function since its establishment till now. So for him saying that, why did they allow ISIS to come to Sinjar and Nineveh Plain and other areas with 60,000 forces melted in front of 300 ISIS militant and leaving all the equipment, all the gear, all the ammunition, all the weapons, they left it in the hand of ISIS. So I don't think it's possible if there is no will. There should be will from Iraqi government, will from the United States and international community to be able to create that zone.
Can I add only a small thing?
I think we're out of time. We're over time, in fact. So I just want to ask everyone to join me in thanking our panelists, and thank you all for coming.